hope it continues as long as he's able to do it amongst his other responsibilities. And it's been a historic and I think revolutionary look at what is occurring at these agencies. And I loved the interview last night. And we're trying to make these cuts permanent. We're trying to send them up to Congress, propose the lowest non-defense level since 2017. If you adjust it for inflation, it's the lowest since 2000, because we want to bank these $163 billion in cuts to the bureaucracy that has been woke and weaponized and wasteful. And the American people know it's not affordable. What they just are maddened by the fact that it's been used to divide them and been weaponized against them. And so that's what we're trying to fix. At the same time, we're going to fund all the president's priorities and get him to $1 trillion national defense figure. And so we're going to have a good reception on Congress, and we've already begun that outreach.
Well, you know, I think the American people want to know that someone is going to pick this ball up and is going to hang on to it like a dog with a stake in their teeth that they're not going to let go of. And Bloomberg wrote this: vote is widely perceived as picking up wherever Musk leaves off. He has the institutional knowledge and perhaps the patience to make DOGE cuts stick and is waiting in the wings. Is that accurate? Are you going to be that person?
Nobody picks up for Elon Musk. I'm happy doing the job that I've been doing. And the relationship has been one of, we want to go as fast as we can to work with DOGE as they're finding savings wherever they possibly can. And then OMB comes along and figures out how to make them permanent. That's going to continue, and we will work with whoever is at DOGE to be able to make sure that this isn't just something that falls by the wayside. I promise you the president is deeply committed to the work of government efficiency. You know,
it is so outrageous when you listen to these examples. And if 2/3 of them, you know, are right on the money, it is, I think, appalling to Americans who work hard and they don't want their money going down the drain for these people to sort of fly, you know, private planes. What is he talking about when he says they rented out stadiums and Caesar's Palace? What agency was that? Who did that?
Well, I have to look on that one, but we've seen rampant waste everywhere. And it's both in our foreign policy, it's, you know, the housing department making the city of Los Angeles do an equity audit. It's a preschool program for curricula. It's literally designed for nothing other than to put CRT curricula in preschools for 4-year-olds. We see that everywhere. And it's not just, is it wasteful, is it maddening, it's divisive, and we're putting an end to it. Promises made, promises kept.
Yeah, what about criminal? Is it criminal?
And I think you would hear that fraudulent, right? I mean, it is insane, and that's the kind of thing the American people would rather be burned in the parking lot than to go to.
So what happens? I mean, is someone going to go to jail? Because it really, you know, I think that the outrage is palpable on this. The waste is disgusting. The idea that you can, you know, charge things and move money into another bank from these funds that are taxpayer. Is it your sense that DOJ is going to actually follow through on some of these and prosecute in some of these cases?
I do. The president's been very clear in working with our wonderful Attorney General Pam Bondi to make sure that wherever we could find fraud, that those are prosecuted, and she's been very clear on that.
So we're looking on the screen, improper payments for fiscal year 2024. It adds up to about $160 billion right there. I do want to ask you about the president's budget, which just dropped, and there's a bit of pushback to it. It has cuts of 22.6%, $163 billion, another familiar number found here. But some are not happy with what they're seeing in this proposal, which is no surprise. I guess usually when the president drops their budget, you're going to get a lot of pushback. But some of this is coming from Mitch McConnell and Roger Wicker in the Senate. Here's a quote. "It's peculiar how much time the president's advisors spend talking about restoring peace through strength, given how apparently unwilling they are to invest accordingly in the national defense." What do you say to that, Mr. Vogt?
Yeah, it's an inaccurate charge. We provide $1 trillion in national defense spending, 13% increase. We do it in two components. We use discretionary spending, and then we put in a historic paradigm all of our increases on defense and homeland security. We use it in reconciliation so that we only need to use Republican votes. We don't want Democrats to have the filibuster as a veto to then hijack the appropriations process and say no to the homeland security spending, and then say that every dollar of defense has to lead to another dollar in non-defense spending. So that has been Washington, D.C. broken. We are changing that. And right now, even before any discretionary appropriations bill is done, you're going to see $150 billion passed in the House and the Senate. That is real money. It's going to real capabilities, and it will lead to all of the increases to get us to $1 trillion bill. And so I love Chairman Wicker. We're going to be working with this team to continue to explain what we believe is a historic strategy to secure the actual increases, as opposed to letting the initiative be to Democrats in Congress.
I got to ask you one more question before I let you go, and it's this. A lot of the agencies that we're hearing about around that table last night are, smaller agencies that most people have never heard of. When you look at the waste in Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, again, it's like $150 billion in these improper payments. So when are you going to go after waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security?
Well, look, I think what DOGE is doing is, in fact, real time changing processes to make sure that the improper payments goes away. We don't have to wait on Congress to do that. We also have a reconciliation bill in which we're going to make sure that we can't have illegal immigrants on the Medicaid program, and we don't have people on that where states need new tools for eligibility requirements. And so there is a lot of work that can be done on the mandatory side of the House. This is just for the discretionary. We wanted to get it up to Congress to start the appropriations process and to inform those that are working on the reconciliation bill. Much more detail is to come when it comes to the other programs that make up the entirety of our federal spending.
Well, thank you. We appreciate what you're doing, and we thank you for your time today. Russell Vogt, OMB. It does seem that there is a DOJ aspect of this as well. If people are stealing from the American people when they carry out these government jobs. So hopefully we'll talk to Pam Bondi next about that. Thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, Jesse, what your overall impression was of this group, because when Brett spoke to some of the members, they were like a lot of CEOs, a lot of people with a lot of experience. This was like that young crowd that we heard a lot about, at least some of them were.
Someone said, what was it like being the dumbest person in the room? And I said, I'm used to it. So the one kid had dropped out of Harvard to go do this. Another kid was 21 years old. I think Big Balls is maybe 23. And the minute they open their mouth, they're so articulate and they're so serious and they're so competent. One of the guys at the end of the interview said, people sometimes, these bureaucrats, that come up to us and thank us. Because you get this story in the press where these guys are mercenaries and they're coming in and they're just axing people and it's a big standoff. No, these people are collaborating with the DOGE team to make the government better. And that was something I don't think anybody had really known before because of the way the media describes it. One story kind of got me. There's this Institute of Peace, and they say they name things because who would ever want to kill the Institute of Peace? Exactly. They walk in the door and there's a armory. There's fully loaded weapons being stored in the Institute of Peace. They're sending hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Taliban, and they start asking questions. And then these guys start destroying evidence. They just start erasing files, destroying pieces of paper. It's eye-opening. It really is.
I mean, this is what I can't get over, Harold. What he's describing is crime. I mean, these are crimes. This is taking money and it disappears. That's called stealing. Layers of corruption, layers of stealing that he described. I mean, what do you think should happen to the people that allowed this to happen? Should people go to jail?
It'd probably be a lot of Democrats and Republicans going to jail. This is something that's gone on for way too long. Look, I am a huge supporter of this effort. This is not the first time we've had efforts like this, but this is an effort that has gotten a lot more attention. And you have the richest man in the world who has pioneered and has come up with some of the great innovations and technologies that the country benefits from over the last 10 years. Two, I hope even with his absence, I hope they continue down the road of finding, you have a $4 billion thing at the one that they had at the Department of Education, and there are no receipts for what was drawn down on. All of it may have been legitimate, but you can't do that in the real world. I do ask everyone to take some caution in terms of our glee for just one thing. As I watched you last night, and you were great, by the way, listening to all of them, letting everybody sort of share their story and share the reasons why they're doing this. I'm reminded that government, having worked there, government is not a startup. Government's not a business. We want it to operate as much as it possibly can as a business. I view government as a great nonprofit trying to be a business, and you always have to make sure that they're not spending more, that they're not wasting it, and people are not stealing it. I look at my church, And we probably do things a little inefficiently in time. We maybe have too many food drives. We may have too much time where we have hotlines for people to call. And we may have too many times where we have domestic violence counseling for people. I bet if you have one of these really, really smart guys, and I was a little disturbed there were only men in the room, but if you have one of these smart guys come and say, hey, maybe you guys should only have one food delivery during the day, we'd probably save money. Or maybe you should only have one time where people can come and ask about problems they're having at home. There's some entities in some parts of our society that aren't going to operate like an innovation center in Silicon Valley, or for that matter, Austin, Texas, or wherever. But this overall exercise is a very good exercise, because if those at the Department of Education, or for that matter, any of these agencies, have to answer these tough questions about where the money's being spent, that's a good thing for all of us.
$4 billion, Judge, for the Department of Education, no receipts. That money was supposed to go to catching up kids during COVID. I remember President Biden in that classroom, and the little girl was like, I just, fall asleep, or I go get something to eat. The money it disappeared, and there's no return on it. It's not an extra food drive. It's gone.
Yeah, well, it's gone because people stole. Let's not kid each other. They may claim, for example, as with USAID, that it went for an opera in Ecuador. But the issue is, was there ever an opera in Ecuador?
That's what he's saying. There was no sex change in Guatemala.
So the money goes to this person, and it subcontracts to that person, maybe an LLC here, and it never gets to the alleged goal. And then the question is, was there a kickback? Did everybody spend the money? And let me tell you, I worked in government for 32 years. Nobody does anything without a receipt, Harold. You don't take money and just spend it willy-nilly. And by the way, people who go to work for government, people who work in civil service, are unaccustomed to first-class events. When you work for government, you're basically, in the back of the bus, in the back of the plane. These people are renting out Caesar's Palace, spending a fortune on first-class conferences where they don't have conferences. And while American taxpayers are cutting their budgets to make sure they can pay taxes, these people are spending the money with absolutely no consequences. Now, the Democrats have been beside themselves with DOGE. How dare you? How could you? This is outrageous, and all this other nonsense. I'm not sure that now that Congress is taking over, that we can even trust Congress, because Congress has had the ability to oversee this for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and they've done nothing because one hand washes the other. And now what we've got to try to figure out is whether or not these criminal referrals, and there have been criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, will be prosecuted. And I think there will be a great many of them.
I think that's what you need, Greg. I mean, somebody has to go to jail for stealing money from the American taxpayer, or else it's just going to go on and on and on and on.
There's nothing worse than too many food drives. But you know what? Let's go back to the A block. This is the hill you die on. The debt's $36 trillion. It's predicted to default in, a decade at this rate of spending. So it could completely destroy the economy, which will destroy the country. This is where you should put your energy. Adults put their energy in this. The Dems, they fly to El Salvador on your dime to defend a thug. That's the hill they choose versus this hill. And they choose these hills despite knowing what we all know. The numbers are there. We're screwed unless DOGE does its job. And yet, what do? They falsely claim that DOGE is cutting Social Security and Medicaid. Why would you say that? Why would you say that when you know that if DOGE doesn't do this, we're all screwed? Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, we're all screwed. The lower third that was up there said this is a long-term thing. This is why polling is garbage. With Trump, the reason why we stick with Trump is because we're in it for the long term, not the short. Saving the economy, not saving one illegal in El Salvador for the short-term dopamine hit. These polling numbers at the moment, it's like asking a guy how he feels while he's moving a sofa, and not afterward when he's sitting on the sofa having a beer and watching the Five. Pollsters and Democrats don't get it. We accept reality. We get the tough stuff over first. DOGE, tariffs, deportation. Yeah, It hurts and it sucks, but the future is going to be great. Pollsters and Democrats do not think about the future. It's now that it's all about now, me, me, me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the commitment that the president has made, and I think he tries to get a lot of the pain up front before the midterm cycle, so that he will have some results to look at that point, and that's when the American people should judge. But
how long should we be ready for the pain? I just want to.
Well, it's only been 4 weeks.
Look at the stock market, Harold.
Yeah, it's getting better, Harold.
Yeah. Remember,
Harold.
you, the master of the half opinion. Oh, look, it's going down. Now it's back up.
We'll see you in 6 months. See how you feel.
All right. Yeah, that's the judge.
You want to bet?
Here is senior national correspondent Rich Edson.
Fraud in flagrante delicto, okay? We're talking at scale.
Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency are showing and defending their work across the first 100 days of the second Trump administration.
Base rate unchanged in 4 3/4%. Of course, this is a rate that moves in lockstep with the Federal Reserve, the local dollar being pegged to the greenback, of course. But of course, more interestingly is the backdrop that we've seen where Hong Kong authorities have been ramping up FX sales of the local dollar to try and keep under control some of the big gains that we've seen, not just in the Hong Kong dollar, but of course across broader Asian currencies. More ahead on the Asia.
Of the game.
It could be either.
It is up to the president how he wants to negotiate.
The higher the tariff, the faster they come.
A 90-day pause is not an eradication.
The trade negotiations are moving quickly.
There will be deals cut.
Trust Bloomberg for all the context and clarity you need as the tariff and global economy story evolves.
This year's bear case, very quickly, becoming the base case.
Nobody covers tariffs like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
U.S. tech is influencing global markets.
Technology is driving business across Europe.
Companies in Asia are betting on tech.
currently thinking, and that interest rate cuts will need to come. They're currently looking for about 3 interest rate cuts before the end of the year. That fluctuates between 3 and 4 cuts, but it's been pretty consistent that people in the market do expect the Federal Reserve to give in and lower interest rates. Nothing much to dissuade them from that at the moment. So that's the path of travel, but it doesn't really tell you what's going to happen to the yield curve. The yield curve probably will need to steepen because people are unsure about the inflation, just as Mr. Powell is unsure about the inflation outlook, but certainly there's more pressure to the upside. So you may well see focus on the short term where people expect the rate cuts, but the long end of the curve to lose value as people suspect that the Fed will have to give in eventually, even though inflation stays high.
Thanks, Mark Cranfield there. Also coming up next on the Asia Trade, we get more analysis when it comes to the Fed's rate path amid tariffs and tax cuts. Mizuho Securities will be along with us. JP Morgan Private Bank also telling us why they see further dollar depreciation. Plus, we'll be getting the latest when it comes to this India-Pakistan conflict with the Brookings Center. Much more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Has been silent in telling those global stories. And that's where we have a mind full of stories that we can mine and mine and mine for years to come. And I think investors realize that, and they understand that there's real potential. And as I said earlier, independent films are making a huge comeback. So you're looking at your $5 million movies, your $6 million movies, and this film fund that we're setting up is looking at films, we're looking at financing films between a budget of $2 million to $8 million. So we truly believe that we will get a return on investment, and it's about managing expectations. We're not saying to investors we're going to go out there and we're going to sort of start making films that are going to bring you $1 billion return on investment. That's not to say there can't be outliers. The world has seen this happen time and time again.
Bloomberg brings you breaking news 24 hours a day. Powered by more than 3,000 journalists and analysts in more than 100 bureaus across the globe. Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
This is the Asia Trade. Let's get you the latest when it comes to the corporate headlines we're following this hour. DBS Group reporting net income for the first quarter that beat average analyst estimates, although it was down 2% compared to the previous year. Net income was $2.24 billion. DBS says tariffs and geopolitical uncertainty are clouding the outlook, also saying that it will deploy funding into non-loan assets if it sees weaker demand for loans. ANZ's profit topped estimates in the first half despite margin pressure on its retail and institutional divisions. Cash profit was broadly flat at $2.3 billion. The bank is seeking to extend the period for its $1.3 billion share buyback, citing increased global uncertainty. CEO Shane Elliott is due to step down next week and hand over to Nuno Matos, the former HSBC wealth chief. Well, Disney shares jumped after the company reported second quarter results that beat estimates and raised its outlook for the full year. Disney citing strong performances from theme parks and streaming, saying full year 2025 earnings excluding certain items would rise 16%.
We had a very strong Q2 with adjusted EPS up 20% from the prior year, rounding out a solid first half of fiscal 2025. Despite questions around any macroeconomic uncertainty or the impact of competition, I'm encouraged by the strength and resilience of our business, as evidenced in these earnings and in the second half bookings at Walt Disney World.
This is Bloomberg.
fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
I'm David Weston. Join me for the next generation of Wall Street Week. This week, the Fed decides, and economists Larry Summers and Ken Rogoff explain what they decided. Why cutting costs at the IRS will cost us all money. Why all those U.S. pharmaceutical companies are making their drugs in Ireland. And the political battle over the future of America's universities.
It's worked beautifully for America, and I would hate to see that get undone.
Watch the all-new Wall Street Week. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up. Survey respondents, including consumers, businesses, and professional forecasters, point to tariffs as the driving factor. For the time being, we're well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. And so we think that leaves us in a good place to wait and see. We don't think we need to be in a hurry. We think we can be patient.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell, they're really urging for patience and more data to get a fuller view of the implications of Trump's tariffs and then also tax expectations for the U.S. economy. And if you take a look at the sort of slight hawkish adjustment we saw when it comes to what traders are now looking at, what markets are looking at for the rest of the year, there's still expectations for 3 cuts by the end of the year, but somewhat heeding that call to patience. At the moment, we're seeing that first cut expected in September, a second one coming in October, and 3 by the time we see out the end of 2025. So not a massive shift, but we'll continue to watch those expectations. But also for his expectations, I want to bring in Stephen Rashudo, who's a chief US economist at Mizuho Securities. Really great to have you in region for us and to look at, the sort of morning after the Fed. It's a tough gig that Jay Powell has at the moment.
Well, he does, but it's actually made tougher by the market's anticipation of what they're going to do, because the market has set itself up, I think, for disappointment. This
so you
is
think
similar.
What we showed there, the 3 cuts, too optimistic?
I think 3 cuts are much too optimistic. And this goes back to, again, the way the market behaved last year. They were anticipating aggressive rate cuts, and the Fed unfortunately made a mistake towards the end of the year when they actually did begin cutting rates in September, and they moved quickly, and the result was higher long-term interest rates. So I think the markets are overly anticipating the degree of economic weakness that'll come as a result of tariffs.
You don't see a recession, though. How do you expect tariffs? And I guess to me, it's more interesting the sentiment aspect, right? The confidence is already taking a dive. How businesses are making plans as though these tariffs will stay in place.
Well, I think you have to understand, businesses have a myriad of investment opportunities in front of them. Not all of them are a function of tariffs. And if I'm in a situation where I have an uncertainty about tariffs, but I have strong economic demand, I have a tight labor market, I have a tax cut coming, which is likely to stimulate economic demand further, I may not make the investment that will hinge on a tariff-related decision, but I certainly have to make other investments because I have to keep driving my company forward. I have to validate those double-digit returns that investors are looking for, and I can only do that by growing my business. So in an environment where there is no liquidity problem, in an environment where there's no systemic credit risk, you have an economy that can pivot around changes like this and not really miss a beat the way people tend to think it does.
Is that an environment where the tax policies can counteract in a strong way?
Well, there's no doubt the tax policies are going to counteract. I think people are missing the point. Tariffs are not the end. Tariffs are the means to the end. The end is a tax cut, and it is a Democrat-oriented tax cut. It is a blue tax cut, not a traditional red tax cut. It has SALT tax deductions in there. It has reducing taxes on Social Security, reducing taxes on overtime, reducing taxes on tips, reducing the interest cost, after-tax interest cost for people who borrow money to buy an automobile. All these factors are really designed to stimulate economic activity through the middle class of America, not the upper income thresholds. And I think that's a powerful, powerful tax cut.
How long will that take? And especially for all of these tax cuts to be passed and also to filter through the economy?
Well, I don't think it's going to take very long. I'm betting that between Memorial Day and July 4th, the tax cut will be implemented. I think it will be fully executed by September 30th. And I think by the time October 1 comes around, the idea is to have all the withholding tables adjusted, have all of the paycheck companies, human resource departments, everybody having the new withholding adjustments in place so that it can benefit the economy beginning October 1. So it gets them into the new fiscal year, and it helps lift the overall economy heading into the midterm elections, which is the driving motivation here. This administration, whether they succeed or not, is yet to be seen, but this administration, I think, wants to try to increase its majority in the House and Senate in the midterm elections, which is also an unheard of development, much as, you know, being president, losing the spot, and then getting it again, that you have an environment in here where they're trying to do something very important in the final 2 years, and that is begin to reorganize government. And I think that's what the idea of DOGE was all about. DOGE wasn't about cutting spending today. DOGE was about finding where you need to cut spending after you get increased majorities in the House and Senate, and you have the ability to drive regular appropriations bills through Congress.
There was a concern that with the layoffs from DOGE, especially with federal workers, that could actually add to the uncertainty coming from the labor market, that people would be unwilling to spend, given that a lot of people work in the government as well. Is this a concern that it could dampen overall sentiment by American consumers?
Again, I'm not a big follower of sentiment. Even the chairman indicated that at his last press briefing, that sentiment's not a particularly good indicator of U.S. economic activity. But to drive home your point in a different way, we have a labor market shortage. We're not seeing any rise in jobless claims. We're not seeing any sustained rise in continuing unemployment claims. The fact that we have a labor market shortage, if you're starting to lose some government workers, they're probably being picked up in state and local governments. They could be picked up in the private sector because there is a labor market shortage. So we're not seeing any real disruption coming out of the labor market, which is what's really boxed the Fed in here, because they have the uncertainty over the inflation, but they're also not seeing the weaker labor market would give them the justification to cut rates. And I think this Fed does want to cut rates. That's why the market's pricing it in. I just don't think the data is going to allow them to.
Before we let you go, do you think the demise of American exceptionalism is overstated?
Look, America's not going to lose its reserve currency status. It still drives innovation. It still drives technology. All that is the case. The fact that Jerome Powell was picked on by Donald Trump in this environment, we have to understand there's a long and checkered history between Federal Reserve chairmen and presidents in the United States. And, there has to be somebody else there to take over that mantle of reserve currency. And I ask you, who in the world is there to do that at this point in time? The answer is no one.
Stephen, really great to have you with us. Sherry?
Yes, Stephen Ricciuto there, Chief U.S. Economist at Mizuho Securities. We do have breaking news at the moment. We'll be watching NTT and NTT data shares in the trading session today here in Tokyo. The Tokyo Stock Exchange will be lifting that trading halt that it implemented earlier today. The lift will happen at 8:46 a.m. Japan time. The trading halt happened after we got a report from the Nikkei that NTT was planning to make NTT Data Group a wholly owned subsidiary in a deal estimated at roughly $15 billion to $20 billion. We are now hearing from NTT itself that the board will be discussing that NTT Data tender offer at a meeting today.
Well, Sherry, Citibank Singapore CEO and head of wealth for Asia South, Yeo Wen-hsian, thinks that investors should stick with U.S. equities despite growing economic headwinds and challenges coming from tariff policies. However, she warns against buying into dips in an exclusive interview during the launch of Bloomberg's New Voices Singapore.
There's just too much news. The news changes every day, right? You go to sleep hearing one thing, you wake up hearing a different thing. You don't know what to do. So again, our advice is stay the course. Don't buy the dip. Look for quality. And you should rebalance your portfolio. So I think in wealth, it's all about the world's changing. So what you would do yesterday could be different from what you do tomorrow. But it's really important for clients to also know what they want to achieve in the longer term. And what the role that we play is to help our clients discover, like what, have clarity, what do they want to do in the longer term.
But give us a sense of kind of rotation.
Yes. So it's not the time to add risk. So if you think that like stocks have come down, it's the right time to go in, we're actually telling clients don't buy into the dip. You can rotate into money market funds. Look for bond funds with shorter duration assets. Look for companies with lower volatility in their earnings. I think this is the advice we're telling clients.
When we take a look at tariffs, some say that it will impact the way economies grow. In fact, there's already been projections where estimates have been cut pretty much across the board. How does that help or hinder wealth creation? How are we looking at growing the business, for instance?
Okay. So at Citi, the clients that we love are the ones who are change makers and who are creating wealth. And that hasn't changed. I think in the world that we live in, there's still a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity. So, and that's true for, like corporate companies as well. So again, like look for where the innovation is happening. It still continues to happen in the world that we live in. In fact, in the disruptive world, there's probably even more opportunities for, companies to differentiate themselves, for entrepreneurs to differentiate themselves, and to be disruptive as well. To kind of play into the disruption and to leverage it, create wealth, create growth, create value.
We talk about the rotation. A lot of people talk about that rotation out of the US into this part of the world. What are you seeing in terms of the regions you cover? Southeast Asia, UAE, for instance, comes under you as well. Are you seeing that?
We are definitely seeing some rebalancing. The reality is the US is a very, very big market. So we wouldn't recommend the clients to exit the US markets altogether. I think US markets, the capital markets, about like 70% of the global market. So not to have US exposure also means that you're not exposing yourself to where there's still a lot of growth, especially in the technology space.
Citibank's Singapore CEO and head of wealth for Asia South, Yao Wen-Xian, there speaking with Insight anchor Haslinda Amin at the launch of our New Voices Singapore event. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
We do not project recession in our assessment of where the world is headed. If we have this cloud of uncertainty coming lower and lower, making it difficult for the business community and for households to take decisions, we could have a self-inflicted injury that I guarantee you we would regret.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Bringing you the latest news in private markets whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Kriti Gupta in the south of France, and this is Bloomberg.
Season is here.
Earnings season begins. Is corporate America in a good place?
Wall Street is bracing.
Bloomberg is first to break the numbers.
We got Delta, Constellation Brands.
The wave of big tech earnings.
We've seen a re-rating of earnings estimates.
I got to pay special attention to all this.
With the smartest insights.
Given the degree of uncertainty, you haven't really cut earnings estimates that much.
Anyone who says they have certainty on where the growth outlook is going, where earnings are going, is probably exaggerating.
Continuing coverage on Bloomberg.
Take a look at some of the after-hour moves. We're watching Alphabet and Apple. We heard that Apple is considering revamping Safari to focus on the AI-powered search engines, potentially ending its longtime partnership with Google. We're also watching the semiconductor space. Of course, we have heard that the Trump administration plans to rescind Biden-era AI chip restrictions, not to mention that ARM gave a lackluster sales forecast. Let's get more on ARM's results and bring in our tech reporter Annabelle Drewlers in Hong Kong. Belle, so what stood out in the results?
Yeah, well, I think, as you said, it was that weak forecast, and that really had a big bearing on the stock price, or is having a big bearing on the stock price in late trade. But actually, for the fiscal fourth quarter, the numbers came in just a little bit better than had been expected. So sales rising to $1.24 billion. But as you said, that guidance, really the big focus here, because the company is saying that revenue is going to be between $1 to $1.1 billion. But Wall Street actually had been expecting it to come in at the top end of the range, and profit as well expected to be somewhere between 30 to 38 cents, taking out certain items, and that again is less than predicted. So I mean, exactly why we're seeing this is an interesting one. So ARM is a company, we know it essentially designs software for computer chips, and then it makes money from royalties, but also licensing out that technology. And ARM is saying that it's getting very close to inking a number of new customer deals, but it's not comfortable with adding them to its revenue forecast just yet. And so it's that timing is why the forecast came in a little bit less than anticipated. But again, a weaker outlook does as well correspond to what we've been hearing from many of its peers so far in the earnings season. And again, that restriction on specific profit forecasts is something else we've heard from other companies in the tech space as well.
We're also hearing of an interesting potential change in strategy when it comes to Apple, right? They're looking to shift how they approach AI search.
Yeah, that's right. So this is something else that made some really big moves intraday, and specifically for the Alphabet stock. But just to give some context here, so we know that the DOJ, or the Department of Justice in the US, has some concerns around how Alphabet has allegedly illegally monopolized the search business, and part of that way that the DOJ would say they've been able to do that is a partnership that Alphabet has with Apple. The DOJ has been going through this lawsuit, and Alphabet was, or rather Apple was called to give testimony in this on Wednesday. And so we heard from one of the executives there, Eddie Q, who was speaking, and he essentially said that Alphabet, or Apple rather, is actively looking at revamping the Safari web search browser on its devices, and what it's going to be doing is possibly shifting to AI. Why Apple is saying they're looking at doing this, so Eddie Q said that actually last month, for the first time ever, Safari searches dipped. And why he's saying that is happening is because people are increasingly migrating to using AI instead. So they're looking at possibly integrating names like OpenAI, so that would be ChatGPT, but Perplexity, Anthropic. He's saying that these could eventually replace standard search engines like Alphabet. Of course, they have their own AI offering, but it has been a little bit behind others in the space. So Apple essentially said, yes, Apple's AI search tool could be on the list, but they're certainly not going to be the only one. And so, again, that sparked a lot of concern. But that would be a very seismic shift for the iPhone, of course, if it does go ahead, and when you've got more than 2 billion devices worldwide.
Annabelle Drewlers there with the latest, and we're taking a look at the commodities complex as well, particularly in light of the sort of patience being advised by the Fed, in particular the move when it comes to gold. We see that drop in gold, but now be reversing some of those earlier losses, up about 0.3%, but those declines being seen after Fed Chair Jay Powell said that the Fed isn't in a rush to adjust rates despite the ongoing trade war, of course. So we did see spot gold seeing some downside reaction there. We're also seeing iron ore seeing a tandem sort of move there down, along with the likes of copper as well, of course, firmly focused on these trade negotiations, and seeing that reaction after the PBOC rate cuts on its reverse repo rate and the reserve requirement ratio there as well. Crude at the moment holding on to those declines. That market also very much focused on the bilateral trade talks. Some of the other stories that we're focusing on at the moment: Pakistan says it reserves the right to retaliate further after India launched what it called targeted strikes on terrorist camps in Pakistani territory. Pakistan's army says 31 civilians were killed in the deepest breach of its territory since the two countries' 1971 war. India, meanwhile, says it conducted precise and restrained response that was designed to be non-escalatory in nature. Vietnam is urging companies to buy more high-value US imports to help in trade talks. The country's trade minister says energy, mining and telecommunication firms in particular should be more proactive. The US ran a nearly $124 billion trade deficit with Vietnam last year, but that narrowed sharply in April following the Trump tariff announcements. Reuters is reporting that Ukraine is starting to consider a shift away from the US dollar to using the euro as its reference currency. The report cites an email from the central bank governor saying Ukraine's EU membership ambitions and global trade fragmentation are among the considerations. Ukraine's national currency was launched in 1996 using the dollar as its reference currency. More ahead on the Asia trade, this is Bloomberg.
Earnings season begins. Is corporate America in a good place?
Wall Street is bracing.
Bloomberg is first to break the numbers.
We got Delta, Constellation Brands.
The wave of big tech earnings. We've seen a re-rating of earnings estimates.
I got to pay special attention to all this.
With the smartest insights.
Given the degree of uncertainty, you haven't really cut earnings estimates that much.
Anyone who says they have certainty on where the growth outlook is going, where earnings are going, is probably exaggerating.
Continuing coverage on Bloomberg. Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern. Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Toyota kicks off Japanese car earnings in the coming hours with quarterly results expected to be robust on recovering sales. But its longer-term outlook is set to veer conservative as the Trump trade war rattles the industry. Let's bring in Bloomberg Global Business reporter Nick Takahashi. Nick, so we know that we'll be watching that impact of tariffs, but what else should we just keep an eye on when we get those results?
Well, I think we're going to see a bit of a mixture of results today. For the first time, Toyota is hopefully going to give us a better yen figure of the impact it foresees on tariffs. For the most part, it's been mum on the topic. It's been staying the course when it comes to local production, any talk of moving production across borders to Mexico or Canada, reducing imports. Toyota has been keeping to the status quo, unlike some other Japanese car makers. So analysts, according to Bloomberg data, forecast about a 4.7 trillion yen outlook for the annual profit this year, and then about 4.8 for the year prior. So that would be in 2 straight years of drops in income. It's worth mentioning that fiscal 2024 was a record high, not just for Toyota, but for all Japanese companies. So it's on the decline after a really, really good high. But what we're looking at is, what we're hoping for is a proper estimate of what the impact of tariffs might be on the world's biggest car maker.
Bloomberg also recently reported that Toyota's chairman has made an offer to buy out Toyota Industries. This is such a core element when it comes to the founding business and the broader group. Have we had any update in terms of how that's progressing?
Yeah, so Bloomberg News reported yesterday that financial advisors have been appointed for all the parties involved, including Toyota Motor and Toyota Industries. We also were told by sources that the tender offer will be made as early as November. So what we're hearing is that the deal is moving forward. You know, this is the ball being kicked further down the road, progress being made in negotiations. And today at earnings, you know, when Chief Executive Officer Koji Sato speaks to the press. Beyond just tariffs, it's going to be about what he makes of the deal, whether he's involved in these talks, and the intentions behind the deal, which are very opaque at the moment.
Bloomberg Global Business reporter Nicholas Takahashi there. Let's take a look at some of these stocks that we're watching when trade opens in Japan, Korea and Australia over the next few minutes or so. Nintendo is one of them, reporting today with its Switch 2 expected to drive the fastest pace of annual revenue and profit growth in years, and that is despite the longer-term uncertainty, of course, that continues to stem from US tariffs. Also watching SoftBank, we saw, of course, Arm Holdings giving a disappointing sales forecast for the current quarter. That's now stoking concerns about a tariff-fueled slowdown for the broader chip industry. SoftBank, of course, owning about 90% of ARM. When it comes to financials, particularly here in Australia, ANZ's profit topping estimates in the first half of the year, despite margin pressure curbing growth when it comes to retail and institutional. Cash profit broadly flat, $2.3 billion was the number in the 6 months ended on March 31st. Sherry.
Fred Heidi, we do have an alert on the Bloomberg, and we're getting the latest lines from the BOJ minutes from their March meeting. The BOJ did not move in that meeting and held rates steady, but we were watching what they said around trade and potentially coming tariffs. The one BOJ member saying that they would raise the rate if the economic outlook is realized. BOJ members also deciding policy without any preconception. One member also talking about the need to be cautious on the timing of the rate hike if risks continue to rise. Of course, in that March statement, the BOJ had referred to the evolving situation regarding trade and other policies, but this was just